Cast out into the freezing wilderness for the ultimate sin of barrenness, a dutiful wife was meant to become wolf fodder. Her cruel husband expected her bones to be picked clean by winter. He never anticipated the terrifying Alpha King of the Fells would claim his discarded queen as mate. Cold winds howled through the great stone arches of Elliot Keep, though the true chill emanated from the dais where Lord Alani Elliot sat. It was the 12th of November, a day historically reserved for the harvest tithes, but this morning's gathering had a far more sinister purpose. Carmela Rivera stood in the center of the vast hall, the heavy velvet of her skirts pooling around her boots, her chin held high, despite the devastating humiliation crashing down upon her. For 5 years, Carmela had been the Lady of Elliot. She had balanced the estate's ledgers, managed the turbulent alliances between the southern lords, and warmed Alani's bed with unquestioning loyalty. Yet the Elliot lineage demanded an heir, a child, to secure their vast, iron-rich territories. For 5 years, her womb had remained empty. Alani stood, his sharp, aristocratic features twisted into a mask of feigned sorrow. He was a master of political theatre, a man who could order an execution with a sympathetic smile. "Lords and ladies of the court," Alani's voice boomed, echoing off the ancient tapestries. "It is with a shattered heart that I must make this decree. The survival of our noble house is paramount. A lord without a legacy is a realm without a future. Lady Carmela of House Rivera has proven unable to fulfill her sacred duty. After half a decade of prayers and physicians, she remains barren." A collective murmur rippled through the gathered nobility. Carmela's gaze remained fixed on her husband, her fingernails biting half-moons into the flesh of her palms. She noticed the slight shifting of eyes toward the balcony where Lady Genevieve of House Carraway stood. Genevieve was barely 19, radiant, and if the whispers among the scullery maids were true, already carrying Alani's bastard. The annulment was not a tragic necessity. It was a calculated replacement. By the ancient laws of the Northern Expanse, Alani continued pulling a rolled parchment from his belt, a marriage unblessed by children after 5 winters may be severed. The barren spouse is to be stripped of all titles and exiled beyond the borderlands, left to the mercy of the Creator. Exile beyond the borderlands meant the howling fells. It was a death sentence. The fells were an untamed nightmare of jagged ice, dense pine forests, and roaming predators. Worse, it was the domain of the wild tribes, the shapeshifters, the savages, who bowed only to the Alpha King. No human crossed into the fells and returned. "You condemn me to death." "Alani," Carmela said, her voice piercing the heavy silence of the hall. It was steady, betraying none of the terror freezing her veins. Alani offered a patronizing, sorrowful look. "I consign you to fate, Carmela. If the Creator deems you worthy, you will find a path. If not, your sacrifice ensures the survival of my bloodline." Within the hour, she was stripped of her velvet and silks. The guards handed her a simple woolen dress and a heavy traveling cloak, a meager defense against the biting frost of the north. She was permitted no jewels, no coin, and no weapons. The carriage ride to the border was a silent, agonizing procession. 2 silent guards escorted her, their faces turned away, unable to meet the eyes of the woman who had graciously governed them just yesterday. When the carriage finally halted, the iron gates of the border wall loomed ahead. Beyond them lay a wall of ancient, snow-laden pines stretching into an abyss of white and grey. The guards opened the door. "Walk, Lady Carmela," the captain muttered, his voice tight with guilt. "Do not look back. My orders are to shoot if you turn around." Carmela stepped down into the ankle-deep snow. The cold was immediate and vicious, biting through the thin soles of her leather boots. She did not beg. She did not weep. Gathering the heavy wool cloak around her trembling shoulders, she walked into the tree line, stepping out of the human realm and into the frozen jaws of the fells. As the iron gates slammed shut behind her, the finality of her doom settled over her. Alani had won. He would marry Genevieve, secure his hold on the southern valleys, and Carmela would be nothing more than a tragic footnote in the Eliot archives, a barren woman who wandered into the snow and vanished. But as Carmela trudged deeper into the suffocating silence of the forest, an eerie sensation washed over her. She was entirely alone, yet the hairs on the back of her neck stood at attention. The shadows between the trees seemed to stretch and shift. She was being hunted. The blizzard struck just before twilight. Wind tore through the canopy, hurling jagged needles of ice that sliced at Carmela's exposed cheeks. She had been walking for hours, driven by pure, adrenaline-fueled stubbornness, but the human body could only endure so much. Her legs felt like lead, her breath rasping in her throat, crystallizing in the frigid air. She stumbled over a hidden root, collapsing into a snowbank. The sheer exhaustion was intoxicating. The snow felt almost warm, a dangerous, deceptive comfort urging her to close her eyes and sleep. No Carmela thought, forcing her numb fingers to grip the trunk of a nearby pine. I will not die here, just to make Alani's life convenient. She hauled herself up, but the sound that followed froze the blood in her veins. It was a low, guttural snarl vibrating through the very earth. From the swirling whiteout emerged a pair of glowing amber eyes. Then another. And another. Soon Carmela was surrounded by a dozen massive wolves, their fur matted with snow, their teeth bared in vicious anticipation. These were not the common timber wolves of the south. They were gargantuan beasts, their shoulders reaching her chest. The legends were true. She had stumbled directly into the territory of the lichen tribes. Carmela pressed her back against the tree, refusing to cower. If she was to be torn apart, she would face them with her eyes open. Get it over with, then. She whispered, her voice trembling. The pack closed in, but before the lead wolf could lunge, a thunderous roar shattered the air. It was a sound so dominant, so entirely devoid of mercy, that the surrounding wolves immediately dropped their bellies to the snow, whining in submission. Out of the blinding snowstorm walked a creature of absolute nightmares. He was easily a head taller than the rest, his fur a striking midnight black that seemed to absorb the little light left in the forest. His muscles rolled beneath his thick coat with every predatory step. This was no ordinary shapeshifter. This was Caon Wulfric, the Alpha King of the Fells, a warlord whose very name made the southern kings lock their fortress doors. The massive black wolf stopped inches from Carmela. His snout was close enough that she could feel the intense, furnace-like heat radiating from his massive form. He inhaled deeply, drawing in her scent. Carmela held her breath, expecting the final lethal bite to her throat. Instead, a sickening crunch of bone and a blur of motion followed. Right before her eyes, the monstrous wolf began to shift, flesh re-knitting and bones snapping into new configurations. Within seconds, a man stood before her. Caon Wulfric was towering, built like a fortress of muscle and scarred flesh. His dark hair was wild, plastered to his forehead by the snow, and his piercing amber eyes the exact same as the beast's locked onto hers. He wore only a pair of dark leather breeches, entirely unfazed by the sub-zero temperatures. He stared down at her, his expression unreadable. He noted the fine, albeit freezing, cut of her features, the aristocratic posture she maintained, even while half dead. "You smell of the southern keep." Caon's voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that vibrated in Carmela's chest. Of iron lavender and Elliot stone. Carmela shivered violently, her teeth chattering. I was Lady Carmela of Elliot, cast out. A dark, dangerous smirk pulled at the corner of Keon's mouth. He knew exactly who Alani Elliot was. The human lord had been encroaching on the fell's borders for years, breaking treaties and slaughtering lichen hunting parties. Cast out. Keon stepped closer, his imposing frame blocking the biting wind. Alani throws away his greatest asset to the wolves. Why, I gave him no heir. Carmela choked out her vision, beginning to swim as hypothermia finally claimed her senses. I am barren. So I am dead. Keon's amber eyes flared with something completely foreign to Carmela outrage. He stepped forward as her knees buckled, catching her effortlessly in his massive, burning hot arms. Barren, Keon murmured, pressing her freezing face into his warm chest. He inhaled her scent again, deeply, analytically. His lichen senses, tuned to the biological rhythms of life, picked up on the fundamental truth her human physicians had missed or intentionally ignored. The rich, fertile scent of her blood was undeniable. Your husband is a fool. Carmela of Elliot, the Alpha King rumbled as darkness pulled her under. You are not the one who is broken, and he will bleed for what he has thrown away. When Carmela awoke, the freezing hell of the forest had vanished. She was entirely engulfed in aggressive, sweltering heat. She opened her heavy eyelids to find herself in a vast, cavernous room lit by a roaring hearth. She was buried under layers of thick, luxurious furs on a massive bed carved from dark wood. Sitting in a heavy iron chair beside the fire was Keon. He was fully clothed now in dark tunics and leather meticulously sharpening a wicked-looking broadsword. You are in Ironhold, Keon said, without looking up his acute hearing, catching the shift in her breathing. The heart of the fells. Carmela struggled to sit up, clutching the furs to her chest. Why didn't you kill me? Keon paused his sharpening stone. He set the blade down and stood, walking slowly to the edge of the bed. The sheer dominating presence of the man made Carmela's heart race in a way Alani never could. Because, little bird, you have been lied to your entire life, Keon stated plainly. My clan healer Matilda examined you while you recovered. There is no blight upon your womb. You are perfectly healthy. Carmela froze, staring at him in disbelief. That's impossible. 5 years. 5 years you shared a bed with a sterile coward, Keon corrected harshly. Alani's bloodline is dead. His father knew it, his masters knew it, and they blamed you to save his political standing. And now he has handed you over to his greatest enemy. The revelation struck Carmela like a physical blow. The years of shame, the quiet tears, the public humiliation, all a grand orchestrated lie to protect a weak man's pride. A sudden vicious wave of anger ignited in her chest, burning away the last of the winter chill. Keon leaned down, resting his massive hands on either side of her, trapping her in his intense gaze. I am going to march on Elliot Keep, Carmela. I am going to tear Alani from his throne, and you are going to stand beside me when I do it, not as a discarded wife, but as the claimed mate of the Alpha King. For weeks, Carmela remained within the heavily fortified walls of Ironhold, healing and transforming. The physical recovery was swift, aided by the hearty spice-rich meats and the restorative herbal broths brewed by Matilda, the elderly lichen healer. But it was the psychological transformation that was truly staggering. In Elliot, Keep, Carmela had been a porcelain doll expected to sit quietly embroider tapestries and nod at Alani's political decrees. Here in the heart of the howling fells, Keon treated her not as a fragile captive, but as an equal. The Alpha King's court was a brutal, meritocratic place where strength, cunning, and loyalty were valued above bloodlines. Keon brought her into his war council, a cavernous stone chamber, dominated by a massive oak table, covered in topographical maps of the northern expanse. At first, the Lycan generals, massive scarred men and women, who viewed humans as weak, treacherous creatures, bristled at her presence. But Carmela quickly proved her worth. "You are planning to march through the Whispering Pass," Carmela noted one evening, her slender finger tracing a charcoal line on the map. She looked up at Commander Griffith Cairns, second in command. "That is suicide. Lord Alani commissioned a series of concealed trench traps there 3 years ago. They are lined with iron spikes and covered with false snow crusts. A full battalion of your heaviest wolves would be crippled before you ever saw the fortress." Keon leaned against the heavy oak table, his amber eyes gleaming with dark amusement as he watched his commanders fall into a stunned silence. "And what would you suggest, my lady?" he asked, his deep voice rolling with respect. "The eastern aqueducts," Carmela replied without hesitation. "They were built by my grandfather, Lord Rivera, before Alani's family seized the valley. The southern grating has been rusted through for a decade. Alani is too cheap to repair it, because it only feeds the lower servant quarters. If your warriors shift into their human forms, they can slip through the grates and open the main portcullis from the inside before the alarm is ever sounded." The generals murmured in grudging approval. Keon's gaze upon her grew heavier, thick with a possessive pride that sent a startling thrill down Carmela's spine. As winter deepened, so did the bond between the exiled lady and the savage king. Keon was a creature of terrifying violence on the training grounds, yet with Carmela, his touch was impossibly gentle. He taught her how to hold a dagger, how to read the tracks in the snow, and how to command the respect of the pack. In return, she taught him the intricacies of southern politics, the alliances that bound Alani to his neighboring lords, and the financial weaknesses of Elliot Keep. Their alliance shifted into something far deeper during the festival of the winter solstice. Under a sky ablaze with the northern lights, Keon finally claimed her. He took her to the high balconies of Ironhold, wrapping his heavy fur cloak around her trembling shoulders. "I have lived for over a century, Carmela." Keon murmured, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear, his breath a warm contrast to the freezing night. "I have fought kings, slaughtered usurpers, and watched empires crumble. Yet I have never met a creature as fierce as the woman who faced down my pack in the snow without a weapon." Carmela leaned into his solid chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I was only angry, Keon. Anger was all I had left." "Then let it fuel you," he whispered, turning her to face him. His large hands cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "But let me give you something else. Let me give you a kingdom that will never cast you out." When he kissed her, it was a searing, all-consuming fire that obliterated every cold, hollow memory of Alani. There was no duty in his touch, no calculated expectation, only raw, desperate worship. That night, amidst the tangled furs of his enormous bed, Keon marked her as his mate. The bite was a sharp sting of pain, followed by an overwhelming rush of connection, a magical tether that bound their souls together. Carmela felt his strength, his fierce protectiveness, and his unwavering loyalty pouring into her veins. However, their honeymoon was violently interrupted 2 days later. Lycan scouts dragged a battered human into the courtyard. Carmela recognized him immediately. Sir Reginald, one of Alani's most trusted household knights. Under the terrifying interrogation of the Alpha King, Reginald broke weeping as he confessed the true depths of Alani's depravity. The intelligence he revealed sent shockwaves through the council room. "Lord Alani is to wed Lady Genevieve of House Carroway on the eve of the new moon." Sir Reginald stammered, coughing violently on the stone floor. "But the child she carries is not his." Carmela frowned, stepping forward from Caen's side. "What do you mean Alani paraded her pregnancy to justify my banishment?" Reginald looked up at her, his eyes wide with fear and shame. "My lady, Lord Alani has known of his affliction for years. He knew he could not sire an heir. He orchestrated the affair himself. The child Lady Genevieve carries belongs to his younger brother, Lord Arthur Elliot." A collective gasp echoed through the room. It was a scandal of unimaginable proportions. "Alani forced Arthur into Genevieve's bed," the knight continued, his voice trembling. "He needed a child with the Elliot look to secure the Carroway fortune. Once the wedding is complete and the dowry is transferred, Alani plans to use the Carroway silver mines to forge thousands of silver-tipped ballista bolts. He intends to march on the fells and wipe out the Lycan tribes entirely. And he plans to poison his brother Arthur the day after the wedding, tying off the only loose end." The sheer sickening scope of the betrayal left Carmela breathless. Alani had not only humiliated and condemned her to death to cover his own sterility, but he was willing to prostitute his own bride, murder his own brother, and fund a genocide just to maintain his grip on power. Caen's roar shook the very foundations of Ironhold. His eyes flared a brilliant demonic gold. "He dares to scheme against my kind, using the wealth of a stolen kingdom." Caen snarled his claws, elongating, biting into the wood of the map table. Carmela placed a calming hand on Caen's heavily muscled arm. The rage in her own chest was cold, precise, and absolute. She looked up at her mate, her chin raised a cruel, beautiful smile touching her lips. "The new moon is in 4 days," Carmela said, her voice ringing with deadly authority. "Let us attend a wedding, my king." Elliot Keep was entirely engulfed in a facade of joyous celebration. Tapestries of gold and crimson hung from the battlements, and the great hall was packed with lords, ladies, and wealthy merchants from across the southern territories. The scent of roasted boar, spiced wine, and sweet perfumes completely masked the rot at the core of the ruling house. At the high table, Alani stood a golden goblet raised high. Beside him sat Lady Genevieve, looking pale and terrified, despite her opulent gown of white silk and pearls. At the far end of the table sat Arthur Elliot, brooding and silent, unaware that the wine in his own goblet had already been laced with slow-acting nightshade. To the future of House Elliot, Alani proclaimed, his charming smile firmly in place. "And to my beautiful bride, who carries the next generation of our noble legacy." The lords cheered, raising their glasses. But before the wine could touch their lips, a sound echoed from the courtyard outside, a sound that froze the blood in every human vein. It was the shattering of iron. The heavy oak doors of the great hall suddenly exploded inward, showering the nearest tables with massive splinters of wood. The jovial music screeched to a halt, replaced by the terrified screams of the nobility. Through the ruined doorway marched the Lycan horde. Dozens of towering warriors in dark leather and chainmail flooded the room, their eyes glowing with predatory intent. They moved with terrifying speed, disarming the keep's guards before the soldiers could even draw their swords. The crowd parted in sheer terror as a massive, broad-shouldered man stepped through the wreckage. Caen Wulfric radiated lethal authority, his dark fur cloak billowing behind him, his hand resting casually on the pommel of his massive broadsword. But it was the woman walking beside him that caused Alani to drop his golden goblet. Carmela looked nothing like the broken, weeping woman he had cast out into the blizzard. She wore armor of boiled black leather, tailored perfectly to her curves, a cloak of magnificent silver wolf fur draped over her shoulders. Her hair was braided tightly against her scalp in the warrior fashion of the northern tribes, and a heavy iron crown rested upon her brow. Her eyes locked onto Alani, burning with a triumphant righteous fury. "Carmela!" Alani whispered, his face draining of all color. He fell back a step, knocking his chair over. "Impossible. The cold. The beasts." "The beasts treated me with far more honor than you ever did, Alani." Carmela's voice projected effortlessly through the silent, terrified hall. She walked confidently up the center aisle. Kaon matching her step for step, his imposing presence, a shield against any who might dare strike at her. "Guards!" Alani shrieked, his composure shattering. "Kill them! Kill the savage and the traitorous whore!" A dozen guards rushed forward, but Kaon didn't even draw his sword. With a terrifyingly casual backhand, he sent the closest guard flying across the room, crashing into a table. The rest of the Lycan warriors bared their teeth, a low collective growl vibrating through the stone floors. The guards immediately dropped their weapons, recognizing the absolute futility of the fight. Carmela stopped at the base of the dais, looking up at her former husband with pure disgust. "You gathered these lords today to celebrate your legacy. Alani," Carmela said loudly, turning to address the stunned nobility. "But this man is a fraud. He has no legacy. For 5 years he blamed me for our empty nursery, masking his own shameful secret. He is sterile." Murmurs of disbelief erupted from the crowd. Alani's face flushed a violent crimson. "Lies, spiteful lies from a madwoman. My bride carries my heir this very moment." "Does she?" Carmela stepped closer, locking eyes with Genevieve. The young woman was trembling violently, clutching her stomach. "Tell them, Genevieve. Tell them whose child you actually carry, or I will let my mate's warriors tear this keep apart, stone by stone." Genevieve broke into a sob, her resolve crumbling under the terrifying gaze of the Alpha King and his resurrected queen. "It is Arthur's," she wailed, pointing a shaking finger at the youngest Elliot brother. "Alani forced him into my chambers. He said if we did not give him a child to pass off as his own, he would have my family executed for treason." The great hall erupted into absolute chaos. Lord Caraway Genevieve's father drew his sword with a roar of fury, turning on Alani. "You bastard! You defiled my daughter to steal my silver!" Arthur Elliot stood up, knocking his poisoned wine to the floor. "You told me it was the only way to save our house, brother. You used us all." Alani realized he had lost everything. His army was subdued, his lords were turning on him, and his grand conspiracy was laid bare. In a final desperate act of madness, he pulled a hidden dagger from his boot and lunged from the dais straight at Carmela. "I will kill you," he screamed. He never even came close. Kaon moved faster than the human eye could track. His hand clamped around Alani's throat, lifting the treacherous lord off the ground with one arm. Alani gagged his legs, kicking uselessly in the air, the dagger clattering harmlessly to the stone floor. Kaon's eyes burned gold, his canine teeth elongating as the beast beneath his skin roared for blood. "Please!" Carmela placed a hand on Kaon's arm. "Do not kill him. Death is too quick a mercy for what he has done." Kaon held Alani, suspended for another agonizing second before tossing him to the floor like a sack of garbage. The Lord of Elliot gasped for air, crawling backward on his hands and knees. Carmela looked down at the pathetic man who had stolen 5 years of her life. By the ancient laws of the Northern Expanse, Carmela echoed the exact words he had used against her, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. A lord proven to be treacherous and barren of honor is to be stripped of his titles. You are exiled, Alani, beyond the borderlands, without coin, without weapons, and without a cloak. Alani looked up in absolute horror. "No," No, the winter will kill me. The wolves. The wolves will not touch you. Kaon interrupted his voice, a dark rumble. You are not worthy of our teeth. You will freeze a forgotten coward in the snow. The Lycan warriors seized Alani, dragging him screaming from his own hall. The lords of the south did not lift a single finger to help him. Carmela turned to the remaining crowd, her presence commanding absolute submission. She negotiated a swift, brutal treaty. Arthur Elliot would take the lordship of the keep, marrying Genevieve properly and raising his own child. In exchange, House Elliot would surrender half of their grain stores to the Fells every winter and swear eternal fealty to the Alpha King. Anyone who opposed would face the wrath of the Lycan army. They all knelt. Months later, spring finally broke through the frost of the howling fells. Carmela stood on the high balcony of Ironhold, the warm sun kissing her skin. She wore a simple dress of spun silk, though it fit much tighter now around her swollen belly. Kaon stepped out onto the balcony, his massive arms wrapping around her from behind. He rested his large hands gently over the prominent swell of her stomach, pressing a kiss to her neck. He kicks like a warrior. Kaon rumbled, a deep purr of satisfaction vibrating in his chest. Carmela smiled, leaning back against the immovable strength of her alpha mate. She had been cast out to die as a barren failure, but she had returned a queen, a mother, and the most powerful woman in the northern expanse. He will be a king, Carmela whispered, staring out over the vast, untamed beauty of her new empire. And he will never know the meaning of betrayal. Did Carmela's revenge satisfy your craving for justice? If this tale of a discarded wife rising to become the Alpha Queen kept you on the edge of your seat, do not forget to hit that like button. Share this story with your friends who love a fierce, vindicated heroine, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dramatic werewolf romances. Drop a comment below, telling us what you would have done in Carmela's shoes. Stay tuned for more epic sagas.